Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report podcast. I'm your host, Vago Muradian. Our podcast is brought to you by Bell. Since 1935, Bell has been redefining flight. Learn more about its pioneering spirit at bellflight.com. And joining us for our virtual coverage of the Army Aviation Association of America's annual conference and trade show. Our coverage is sponsored by Bell and Elbit Systems of America, as well as Leonardo DRS, is Brigadier General Wally Rugen, the director of the Future Vertical Lift Cross-Functional Team at U.S. Army's Futures Command. Sir, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, Vago. Thanks for having us, and I appreciate the format and in the challenging times we're in.
Certainly is. Hope, sir, yours, and your team are doing well. Talk to us a little bit about how you guys are continuing to deliver as best you can despite the COVID pandemic, with the limitations that exist, both on individual contact as well as on travel.
So currently, we are seeing no impacts to cost or schedule on any of our signature programs. And so we're fortunate in that regard. A lot of our heavy work was done in the first quarter and then early in the second quarter of fiscal year 20. So I'm sure everybody's tracking the contract actions on FARA and FLRAA that happened in mid-March. And because we got that work done, which was really the kind of the face-to-face work before the COVID shutdown, we're in a good spot right now to just continue on virtually, maintain momentum. There are some things we having to work around, but currently, the teams are being very innovative in that. And we're seeing no delays to our program or cost increases to any of our signature programs at this time.
Which is certainly good news. And yes, that's right. You guys awarded contracts on FARA, which is on FLRAA, which is the Future Long Range Assault aircraft, to Bell and to Sikorsky, and then to Bell and Sikorsky as well for the Future Armed Reconnaissance aircraft. Let me ask you though, do you project any downstream impact, because Undersecretary of Acquisition and Sustainment Ellen Lord has said that she expects a 3-month delay on programs, as well as potentially billions of dollars in additional costs. Are you tracking any of that? Are you building any margin? Is there anything that you see out there that could become problematic for you, or you think you're going to be pretty okay either way on these programs?
We think we're going to be pretty okay, and that's a great way to kind of phrase it and characterize it. Obviously, if the shutdown lasts for an inordinate amount of time, there is some face-to-face interaction we need. There is some suppliers in hotspot areas that eventually will run out of supplies and will need things from them. But at this point in time, we're looking pretty good, right? And we are briefing General Murray weekly. We had been doing it twice a week on all our COVID impacts, and so the team has done a deep dive in this, and currently we're okay, even with travel being shut down through the 30th of June. So we are finding a way, in particular, to conduct the virtual kickoff meetings we've had to do with both the Future Long Range Assault and the Future Attack Reconnaissance aircraft, but also our Architectural Control Working Group, which is part of our modular open system approach. We've been able to do that virtually. The IT guys have given us the bandwidth to be able to get those things done, and people seem very trained on getting this stuff done virtually. So we're doing everything we can to stay on schedule, and so far the team has come through.
Just want to ask you now to give us sort of an update on where you are on both of these programs. And let's start with FLRAA first, because that's been running a little bit longer than FARA. What's next on that program as you try to still deliver against a pretty ambitious deadline, which is later this decade for in-service?
Yeah, so for FLRAA, obviously the competitive demo and risk reduction OTAs were awarded to Bell and Sikorsky Boeing. Really, last year was the year of FLRAA. We had about 11 major milestones that we were able to cross over successfully. Everything from an independent tech readiness assessment by OSD, or the Office of the Secretary of Defense, someone outside the Army, to a successful AROC, or our Army Requirements Oversight Council, that requirement signed by General McConville coming out of that. And then seeing both Joint Multi-Role Tech Demonstrator aircraft flying last year, and a host of other things, sufficiency from CAPE and the whole deal. So what we saw in the Army was an ability to set the conditions for a 4-year acceleration from first unit equipped at 2034 to now first unit equipped at 2030. And the competitive demo and risk reduction contracts we awarded, the CD&RRs, really set the conditions for that 4-year acceleration. And again, we're bridging the gap between that was there between the JMRs really ending their flight cards and their flight envelope expansion to the FLRAA program of record. And so this CD&RR and this 4-year acceleration bridge that gap. It maintains industry momentum. And again, the President's Budget 21 that we submitted instantiates and funds that 4-year acceleration. And so you see it in there now. So our money is where our mouth is. And then what we're going to come out of this CD&RR is just a very rigorous trades analysis. So we're going to have requirements that are achievable and affordable. And so really proud of the FLRAA team, and really proud of all the things they delivered last year to set us up for this accelerated timeline.
Let's get a snapshot on FARA. I think when Army aviation leaders announced that, and last year took great pains to say, hey, look, we're going to move with startling speed to try to field this. At the time, everybody was talking about a 4-year sort of opportunity window, which was very, very, I think we can agree, aggressive. Where you are on that program, and what are the next milestones?
Well, again, I think we did what we said we were going to do, and we maintained our schedule. So we did down select the Phase 2 performers to Lockheed Martin Sikorsky and the Raider X, and Bell and their Invictus offering. So we went from 5 performers to 2, and again, they delivered. All 5 performers delivered well over 40,000 pages of data that we poured through this past quarter, in second quarter, and we had upwards of almost 400 experts in that source selection. And again, we really feel like we got great products from all 5 vendors, and obviously 2 were better than the others. At this point in time, we're into Phase 2. The Phase 2 will be a final design review that occurs November, December of this calendar year, and then we will be on our way to flying in November of 2022. The reason we feel we can do this to review is we took the same team that did the very successful JMR, and we gave them the same timeline they did JMR in, but with added scope. And so instead of a tech demonstrator, which is a lower bar than a prototype, we're actually going to be prototyping a competitive prototype that is operationally relevant in the space, in the attack reconnaissance space. And so they have till November of 2022. Again, we're on schedule, on budget, and I think the other thing that's important to note is that the engine for FARA is going to be government furnished equipment, or GFE, and that GFE engine is the ITEP engine, and GE is going to meet and is currently meeting schedule because they've been incentivized to meet our FARA schedule, and those pre-production engines currently are going to be ready for the 2 performers to integrate, and so very proud of the GE Aviation team and our PM out of the PEO Aviation that is delivering that capability currently. That is probably one of our biggest watch items, and we're watching it very closely, but currently we're on schedule on that as well. And then when you look at the FARA ecosystem, and what I want to define on the FARA ecosystem is just our ability to find, fix, and finish our pacing threats in a very contested and competitive peer or near peer fight or environment. And we are taking that FARA ecosystem. We started it last year out at China Lake and Yuma Proving Grounds, our western test ranges. And we're really flying, like the Secretary McCarthy says, we're flying before we buy. And so we're flying that ecosystem out there, which is a combination of both the rotorcraft, small drone-like UAVs that we're calling air-launched effects because we're launching them from the air, to be able to find, fix, and finish, the things that are hunting us or the things that any maneuver commander would want us to take out early. And again, we're seeing to good effect that ecosystem across a number of use cases, which I can get into later, that just allow us to be able to talk, to find folks based on either their electronic emissions or what they look like with an algorithm, be able to identify them. Once we identify them, to be able to put effects on them, both non-lethal, which would be electronic warfare kind of effects, or lethal, which would be kinetic. And so it's not just the FARA, it's the ecosystem, and we're having pretty good success with that as well.
Talk to us about how the two programs are cross-connected and what one, how is one helping the other be a better program in your mind?
In a number of ways, and I think we're squeezing everything out of that joint multi-role tech demonstrator for both aircraft. So when you look at the technologies we know we have to advance on tech readiness levels or manufacturing readiness levels, full authority fly-by-wire digital flight controls, powertrain risk, drivetrain risk, open system architecture risk, and getting airworthiness folks in earlier than we've ever done in the past to make sure that our systems are airworthy early, so we're not finding out, downstream 5-6 years in that, we missed something. We're also getting our testers in early, and they're looking and red teaming our approaches to ensure that we're doing far more things in parallel than sequential. And so that is kind of, again, a very good transition to our open system approach, our MOSA, modular open system approach, and our open system architecture. That is coming out of the JMR S&T event or effort. And it's little known. You kind of got to know your way around JMR TD in that program, but we had a program up under that, which was called Mission System Architecture Demonstration, which is our science and technology work that's feeding our requirements. What that's brought forward really into PEO Aviation is our Architecture Control Working Group, which the PEO is running, the CFT is participating in, but also all of our industry and government experts are in there as well. And so we want to make sure that that open system is common to both on a government-defined interface and a government-defined standard. And I, kind of my stupid anecdote for that is we're going to have a USB port. And when you plug your USB cable in, you're going to see the little spinning of the icon, and then all of a sudden we're going to know what mission system you just plugged in. That is going to help us upgrade at the pace of technology and really address affordability concerns. So we're not getting into vendor lock and very high profit margins. We still want industry to have a profit, but not some of the high ones we've seen in some programs out there.
Well, and obviously, right. I mean, these closed systems architectures have, they're legal, but every company wants to sort of lock in their long-term advantage of it on a program where you've got to go through that contractor as the gatekeeper. Whereas each of the military services has been trying to get to this open architecture format to allow you effectively to be able to make changes and replace contractors more easily if, for example, you can get a better deal or they're not performing. Let me ask you how these two programs are also sort of paving the way and what you're learning, because eventually there's going to be a future attack aircraft replacement. I think everybody in the Army goes to quite long lengths to say that this is the future armed reconnaissance aircraft, which is the Kiowa replacement. On the other hand, having been one of the guys who covered that transition, and even comments that the chief has made to a degree are like, look, we've got to get to an armed aircraft of the future, in part because the Apache is a very expensive aircraft to operate. How do you, I know that you've been asked this question a billion times, right? So how does FARA pave the way for whatever is the future attack aircraft? Just like how does FLRAA get you to a Chinook replacement eventually as well, which the Army, did want to accelerate a little bit, but I think Congress gave kind of a bit of a brushback pitch a couple of years ago.
Well, and again, I think when you look at our current fleet, we are in great shape risk-wise. So we are much more at the inflection point of the 1970s than the 1990s. So in the 1970s, we had brand new stuff coming out of Vietnam. The 1990s, we had a lot of alpha model aircraft that weren't really incrementally, we knew we had a lot more incremental upgrade work, and that's our current fleet. So you see the M model, the F model, the Echo model, and all those aircraft are very new. We've just now started to field the Echo model version 6. And so when we looked and we went to the Combined Arms Center at Fort Leavenworth and worked with them on our large-scale combat operations gaps. What are our gaps when we have to go up against a peer competitor? That analysis really fed into our first two choices here, which is FLRAA and FARA. And so that's why we have to kind of get after them first. And then risk-wise, we're in a great inflection point because our current fleet is modernized. We're not having the problems that maybe Comanche had back in the day with an Alpha model Apache, Alpha model Blackhawk. I think we had a Delta model Kiowa at that time, but that, it was reflective of another Alpha model aircraft because it was a Vietnam era thing. And then we had a lot of Charlie and Delta model Chinooks, again, similar to the Kiowa, right? So we're in a great inflection point to jump forward. As far as when the next, when we're going to replace the Apache, when we're going to replace the Chinook with a Cape Set 4 or 5 aircraft. Again, I think we have a multi-decade approach, and in our long-range planning and in our strategic planning that we look 20 and 30 years out, we have a plan for those aircraft. But because they're so new, it's not this decade, it's the next one.
And what about FLRAA paving into what the next heavy lift aircraft should look like?
Again, I think we've given industry and our science and technology folks reps and sets. We don't really have anyone that's built a new aircraft. This new aircraft creation happened in the 70s. And so giving both sides, the government team and the industry team, reps and sets on new aircraft that actually have to fly and get out there and do it has been valuable. So ultimately, we're going to have the talent, and the talent is going to be managed, I can tell you that, to be able to deliver the additional capability sets when appropriate.
So how much in FARA, how much of this is Kiowa? How much Kiowa is there in it, and how much Apache is in it? Because if you look at it from a capability standpoint, it's going to be an awful lot like Apache, or a lot more like Apache
I
than
disagree,
Kiowa.
Vago. I think it's far more scout. We are going to outsource a lot of our lethality to long-range precision fires, to next-gen combat vehicle, and to the joint force, shooters out there. I think when you look at FARA, it's far more of the maestro or the conductor for, getting sensors on our the targets that are high payoff or high value for us, and then finding the right shooter in a very agile manner, because our kill chains have to be very tight in this competitive environment. And FARA is going to be doing far more of that, far more conducting of the battlefield than actually being the shooter that has to take the shot. So we're going to outsource that a lot, and then even the survivability, we're finding very innovative ways to outsource a lot of the survivability, so we have that very, very agile knife fighter that the Kiowa used to be, that we're going to get out of FARA for sure.
So it's very much to bring back Gordon Sullivan's favorite expression: the quarterback of the digital battlefield, the quarterback of the future battlefield.
Yep. I don't like using quarterback, but it's a fair analogy. Absolutely.
It's just sadly severely dating me is what it's is what it's doing.
I didn't want to say that.
Yeah, that's all right. Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate that. Do you see any technical hurdles at this point? I mean, are there any sort of technical long poles in either or any four of these tents as far as you're concerned, or you're pretty comfortable where you guys are from a technology development standpoint?
No, I again, eyes wide open. I mean, we have challenges and we have to solve them. I think that's what made the independent tech readiness assessment of the JMR so powerful. So when OSD R&E came in and gave us a good wire brushing, again, well before we normally do these things, they gave us a list of a number of technologies where we needed to focus our efforts. I think when you look at the powertrain, which is the engines of the future fleet, the drivetrains, the mission equipment and the open system architecture, and then the full authority fly-by-wire flight controls and the aero environments on these advanced aircraft configurations. We were told basically a year ago by OSD, hey, here's the list, here's your watch list. None of that was high risk, but there was risk there that we needed to burn down, and that's why you're seeing this this CD and RR. That's why you're seeing the extension of the JMR work. That stuff was supposed to be done in 19. Congress extended it in 19 with a positive mark or an add, and we're in the process of extending it now because we're learning so much and fixing so much well ahead of schedule. So this prototyping and flying the prototypes and flying before we buy is really helping us burn that risk down on those areas I mentioned.
Let me ask you really quickly, how, since you're going to be that sort of coordinating element on the battlefield, and as you said, directing fires from unmanned platforms, long-range fires, as well as the joint team, how are you interfacing particularly with the other services to make sure that the aircraft you're developing, right, we understand how you're working in the Army ecosystem, but how are you cross-connecting with the Air Force, the Navy, and the Marines to make sure that this aircraft is going to be able to work with, to achieve the aim that you want it to achieve?
We're already working with SOCOM, and they're active participants last year out at China Lake with us, and will be active participants this year at Yuma Proving Ground. Our information is flowing very aggressively to the Marine Corps. Marine Corps has been out to see and observe at a very high level our work, and I think we are using waveforms that are common amongst the Joint Force. The data link that is common with us, Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, and also with Link 16, we are using what the Joint Force is using, which hasn't been the case with the Army in the past, but we're using it now.
Let me ask you about sustainment. At the end of the day, each extra layer of support requirements and logistics means soldiers' lives are at risk to resupply, especially when you're operating forward in a denied area. How are you thinking about what you want the sustainment and logistics train for these aircraft to be?
We have a number of efforts where we're studying that deeply. Obviously, the Congressional Budget Office last May came out with a great piece that was, done, outside. They just did it for us, and we didn't ask. They just did the analysis, but the cost of replacing today's Army aviation fleet, and then we followed that up, with CSIS, and they gave us a report on assessing the affordability of Army aviation. And what it tells us in there is 68% of the total cost of ownership is a sustainment bill. And so we've developed a very solid team between the CFT and Aviation Missile Command. We live with AMCOM, and they're our sustainment experts. A number of studies to get after our operational availability and our material availability are ongoing out at the National Institute of Aviation Research at Wichita State, which is kind of the gold standard for some of this sustainment work. And then we have a number of consultants that have looked at very high-profile programs that are out there, not necessarily inside the Army, but inside the Joint Force, that have had relative successes and relative failures. And that consulting work is feeding back into what are our crown jewels? What do we need to, what are our watch items to make sure we watch the cost and the total cost of ownership? And I tell you, we've gone to school on those programs, and we're sharpening our negotiation knives for IP and data rights that we need. We're sharpening our requirements to make sure we're not gold plating anything to make something just such a cost driver that it kills the program. And we've already set up a combined teams between Army Futures Command and Army Materiel Command to make sure we have the experts resident in the CFT to keep me on track. Because affordability, I mean, these things got to be in the dirt. We're Army guys, and we got to be affordable, and we got to have things that are resilient, and we're focused on that.
And how are you making those trade-offs, by the way?
I think it's informed trade-offs.
To get
Sure.
that cost balance right.
Yeah, I think really it's our OODA loop, and so we start with our studies. We flow into a high-fidelity physics-based model on what we truly need, not what someone anecdotally thinks we need. And you can think of a number of mission equipment platforms that are probably pretty boutique and pretty expensive that folks think that we have to have on here, but they haven't done the modeling and simulation in a physics-based model to say, do you really need it to fight and win? What we're finding is the lower tier of the air domain is pretty cluttered. It's pretty complex to find us, fix us, and finish us, and so we're hiding in that clutter, using it against our enemies and popping up where they don't expect us to basically put effects on them. That modeling fed into our Western Test Range live experimentation and risk reduction, where we flew, again, fly before we buy.
Right.
And some of that was unclassified work that we've shared liberally, and some of it's classified work which we're keeping locked up. Ultimately, what that has done is really made sure not to gold plate. And in a classified forum, I could tell you what we've taken off the table, things that technologies we know we don't need. And it's really addressing that affordability and requirements. And so our requirements documents are much more leaner. We've built a cost-conscious culture, and we're proving it out in the prototyping.
And let me ask you one last question, sir, which is Navy Acquisition Chief Hondo Gertz told us that he's working as hard as he can to try to accelerate his programs. And let me ask you one last question, sir. Navy Acquisition Chief Hondo Gertz told us about how he's trying to use this program, use this crisis to try to accelerate his programs and actually end up at the end of this with a system that can move a little more quickly. How much margin for acceleration do you have on these programs, given how hard, how long, and how focused the effort has been on the part of you and the Army team to sort of define what you guys want and then try to move forward as crisply as possible? Do you think you guys can bring these programs forward a little bit?
I think we're at the right spot right now. We're doing things as fast as we want to do them. It's risk informed, so we're about where we should be. Does that mean that there's no slack if we get some kind of emergency that we need to move faster? I think there's slack there that, if it was critical, absolutely critical, we could. But both these aircraft are on schedules similar to how long it took the Army to make an Alpha model Apache into a Delta model Apache, not to create the first Apache. So I think that we're moving out about as fast as we want to.
But, there is a lot of conversation that there'll be budget cuts coming out of this. How severely does that affect your ability to deliver? Do you think that based on the resources you have, you're able to execute. How budget dependent is and are your programs at this point?
Well, and that's a complex question, because I think what you saw coming out of the CBO report, again, that was unasked, is these two aircraft, if we build them at the rates that we would need to kind of turn the fleet in the typical fashion the Army does, we're at the low end of our average procurement budget for the last 20 years. So we've built a lean, cost-conscious program here. And, you know, they kind of, the counter narrative is always, well, you didn't do one, you can't do two. That's false. The PEO during the war was doing about 5 or 6. So we were doing the F model Chinook, we were doing the Echo model Apache, we were doing the Mike model Blackhawk, we did the Gray Eagle, we did the Shadow, we did the ITEP engine. And so those acquisition experts over there have been juggling 6 to 8, glass balls for a while. We have the talent to do this. We have the talent to do 2. And then when you look at the budget, if we go down to 1, when we're really doing 3 major aircraft right now with Apache, Blackhawk, and Chinook, what you're going to see is a devastation of the vertical lift industry. So how many of these centers are we going to close? And are we going to, as a nation, want to walk away from one of these places that build vertical lift assets? I don't think so. And so, we have a report coming out soon on what the industrial base looks like and the concerns are. And so I think we also have to think about the industrial base and what we're going to do there. So I know a very long answer to what should have been short, but there's a lot to unpack there.
Sir, thanks very, very much for joining us. Really, really appreciate it. Best of luck, and hope you, yours, and your team stay well.
Yeah, Vago, thanks for the invite, and great talking to you again.
And thanks for joining us. Please follow our daily interviews with top government, military, industry, and thought leaders at Defense and Aerospace Report, and subscribe to our weekly newsletter. Follow us on Twitter at DEFAERO Report. That's at DEFAERO Report. Like us on Facebook at Defense and Aerospace Report. And check us out on LinkedIn. Look for our weekly cyber report sponsored by Northrop Grumman. For more than 80 years, Bell has pushed past the boundaries of what's possible to drive aviation forward, going above and beyond flight, bellflight.com. Thanks again to Bell for their generous sponsorship, and we'll see you again tomorrow.